And welcome everyone to Sports Talk Line, where we talk sports 24/7, 365. And on this week's episode of Battle for the Big East, we're going to be talking with CJ Holmes as we talk about the Beast in the East, Villanova basketball. How are you doing today, CJ?
Doing well, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Now, our first question, which it could be a long-winded one, but what do you think as of right now, end of February, going into March, are some of the strengths on this Villanova basketball team?
I think, obviously Villanova's biggest strength is its perimeter play. I mean, you got a guy like Colin Gillespie out there, Jermaine Samuels, he's a forward, but he's out there on the perimeter, Caleb Daniels, Justin Moore. Villanova has a very strong group of guards. They're all very solid. They can all hit the three ball. They can penetrate. They probably don't penetrate as much as they should at times. But, when you look at Villanova's collection of perimeter players, it's among one of the better groups in the country.
Gotcha. And now we're going to flip the coin a little bit. Now, we kind of mentioned this before we went on air. What do you think are some of the biggest weaknesses or challenges for Villanova going forward? Because Villanova, they've been a top 10 team. They've been the best team in the Big East since the Big East has realigned. But there are probably some areas where they do have some weaknesses and they can be had. What are some of those weaknesses in your opinion?
Well, I want to start on the offensive side of the floor. There are times where, while Villanova is one of the better three-point shooting teams in the country, there's times where they get a little trigger happy. And when those three-pointers aren't falling, sometimes it seems as if they don't have another layer of their offense to go to. Guys kind of get away from, attacking the rim. They keep jacking up three after three. And, even though they're not falling, they kind of stay stuck in that rut. And, we saw that in essentially all of their losses this season: Virginia Tech, Creighton, St. John's, especially in that Creighton game. I mean, the way Creighton defended Villanova, they took them completely out of the character. Villanova is best when operating inside and out. And if they don't have that inside game going in, it doesn't have to be, and it isn't an inside game in terms of, a back to the basket presence, because Villanova essentially doesn't have that. They have Jeremiah Robinson Earl, but he's more of a stretch guy. He wants to shoot, those baseline 15-footers and, open threes. That's his game. He's not a guy that's going to put his head down and attack the rim all that often, even though he is crafty inside. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is, offensively, when the three balls aren't falling, sometimes that can make Villanova extremely vulnerable. Kind of transition to the defensive side of things. Interior defense has been an issue for this Villanova team all season long. It seems as if any team has a halfway decent big man on the inside, Villanova is struggling to keep them away from the rim because they don't have a true rim protector. Maybe that guy could have been Demir Cosby-Roundtree, but he's been out all year with injury. Jeremiah Robinson Earl, while he's a 6'10" forward, he's not necessarily a strong defensive presence inside, even though he's a guy who can move his feet on the perimeter and stay in front of dudes on the outside. Heading into the tournament, that's going to be something to really keep an eye on with this Villanova team, is how they guard guys inside. Another thing is Villanova gives up a lot of open three-point looks. It just comes down to poor rotation at times, or guys not being on the same page. So I would say that those are the biggest weaknesses this Villanova team is currently dealing with.
All right, I definitely think you bring up some good observations. Now, knowing the Villanova weaknesses, we got the Big East tournament coming up. The Big East season's going to come to an end. It looks like they're actually going to play the full tournament too, unlike last year when they only got 2.5 games in. But knowing those weaknesses, like those big physical teams, can give Villanova problems. Who in the Big East do you see providing that issue? Because off the top of my head, I think it could be Providence. But do you see any other teams in the Big East that could be a problem for Villanova?
Well, they played a good game with UConn this past weekend. UConn's a team that they've had their own struggles in their own right. At times, while they have a dynamic guard like James Bouknight, at times offense is a real big issue for that team. But the point being is they still have enough slashers on the perimeter, James Bouknight in particular, that can give a team like Villanova a lot of trouble. St. John's has already proved that it could crack the formula to beat Villanova. I think the biggest threat to Villanova in the Big East crown is that Creighton team. I mean, we saw what they did to them on their what they did to Villanova on their home floor a couple weeks ago. Villanova had no answer for Marcus Zagorowski. They had no answer for Bishop inside. Creighton just runs so many intricate actions, and they get guys moving in different directions. And what are Villanova's biggest weaknesses? Like we just discussed, interior defense and guarding the three ball. And the way Creighton runs its actions, they're great at getting to the lane, especially when you got a dynamic point guard like Zagorowski, and they want to shoot a lot of threes, and they do it with not a lot of hesitation. So when we're really looking at who's standing between Villanova and a Big East crown, you gotta take a red Sharpie and circle Creighton.
Okay, I can definitely see that because Creighton seems like a much tougher team than they were in previous years. And I think they do have another matchup coming up with Creighton, and you got to wonder if Villanova will try to get them back, to say the least. But remember, everyone here who's watching, if you haven't done so already, click that like and subscribe button, and to subscribe to Sports Talk Line, where you can follow us and get all these weekly episodes of Battle for the Big East. Now, we talked about the biggest challenges within the Big East for Villanova. Now, let's Villanova's a lock for the NCAA tournament. They can lose every game from now out. They'll still be seeded. You know what? They might be better off being a 4 or 5 seed so they don't run into Gonzaga or Baylor or something along those lines. But I really think the weakness for Villanova always shows up in the field of 32 game, where that's the one where they couldn't make it to the second weekend. And whenever they break through, the last 2 times they won a national title. So looking at all the other conferences, you can look at the Big Ten, the Pac-12, the ACC. You can maybe even look at the Atlantic 10. What do you think would be a very difficult field of 32 second-round matchup for Villanova this year?
I was taking a look at a bracket on CBSSports.com earlier today. They had Villanova slotted as a 2 seed in some region. I don't remember off the top of my head. But, it's hard to really pinpoint a specific team when you don't have your bracket yet, right? We don't have, the full bracket. But the point is, Villanova's weaknesses are very specific, and there are a lot of teams in the country who like to play at an up-tempo pace, teams who are physical, teams who, aren't afraid to shoot the three ball. Off the top of my mind, I think of a team like Ohio State, maybe a team like Texas that Villanova, they already beat. But as we know, it's hard to, beat a team twice in 1 year. How would Villanova fare against a team like Houston, or what about Alabama? Like I said, again, it's hard to really project, how Villanova would do in a round 32 without having a set bracket. But, there are plenty of teams out there that can give Villanova a lot of trouble, knock them out. You don't want to see a team like Illinois, right? I feel like a team like Michigan gives them a lot of issues too. They're extremely physical. Would actually be an interesting matchup, Villanova versus UVA at some point. 2 teams that like to slow it all the way down, who kind of want to pick you apart offensively, methodically, and want to hunker down and guard you on defense. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I definitely think you mentioned, I think any team from the Big Ten would be difficult because they're very big, they're very physical. I would probably throw in Wisconsin. And I'm trying to find teams that would be at that 7 range. I'm not sure a Rutgers team would be an issue because if Villanova is a 2, Rutgers could be a 7. Rutgers kind of hasn't been there in a while, but they're an upstart. They got nothing really to lose, but they play physical, but I don't know if they have the size to overwhelm them. But I think that's going to be something when we talk Villanova basketball is that second weekend, that second game, that field of 32 game has always been an issue for them. But this is one question where I really feel like every Big East team since realignment, if they make it to the field of 32, they're happy. That season's a win. Villanova, not so much because they kind of have to carry the banner of the Big East. And, you always hear something, well, the Big East only had X amount of teams in the Sweet 16, blah, blah, blah. It's usually like 1 team, maybe 2. For Villanova, what would be a successful season for them? Do they have to win the Big East tournament? Or instead of winning the Big East tournament, do they need to make a run in the NCAA tournament and make it to at least the Sweet 16, if not further?
That's an interesting question, because entering this season, the hype surrounding Villanova, it felt like, was at an all-time high. When we were talking about, entering the season, we were talking about who are the three clear-cut best teams in college basketball. You would have said Baylor. You would have said Gonzaga. You would have said Villanova, simply because of their veteran talent and, the underclassmen talent they were bringing back. Not to mention that Villanova returned its entire roster this year outside of Saddiq Bey. With that much, with so much veterans on this Villanova team, you figured throughout this season they would be mentioned in the same whisper of a Baylor or a Gonzaga, but they just haven't. And it's crazy. We're so critical about Villanova, but at the end of the day, they're 13-3, right? At the end of the day, you beat Creighton next week, you all but lock up the Big East, right? So, what is a successful season for Villanova? Again, with all the hype entering the season, a Final Four berth or bust is, probably the way they're thinking about this. But, knowing how Jay Wright's been handling the season, with the long COVID pause and, all the issues and, setbacks that have come from a year like this, if Villanova needs to win, the Big East tournament. I mean, that needs to happen. A Final Four run would be great, but, the fact that, this team has been able to play a good number of games this year and, make it through relatively, scratch free, I think that's a success within itself in a way.
Gotcha. Now, I'm going to hit you with one last question before you leave, because you kind of mentioned it. Villanova returned pretty much all their players except Saddiq Bey from last year. The NCAA has granted everyone on college basketball an extra year of eligibility. Do you see any Villanova seniors, or do you see anyone else really throughout college basketball taking advantage of that extra year at what we call the mid-major, even high major level? Or do you see guys being like, know what, I have my 4-year plan, I'm going to try to play somewhere else? What do you think is going to happen with that?
Well, I think it's going to be a lot of that. I mean, what people don't realize is the grind of the college basketball season is it's relentless. And some of these guys have been doing it for 4 years. And like you said, some of these guys say, I'm going to do my 4 years and I'm going to try to go pro, or I'm going to go try to, play overseas or something like that. It's really going to be, just based on certain guys' personal preferences. Looking at Villanova right now, they got 4 freshmen coming in next year. Say Colin Gillespie and Jermaine Samuels and those guys, and let's just imagine they decide to stay. How is the school going to pay for all of those scholarships? That's kind of the issue I see a lot of teams running into. And, in Villanova's case, this is a team that likes to mold and, reload. This is a team that likes to, guys wait their turn. Some guys, Jay Wright has a plan, right? And, as much as he'd love to have another Colin Gillespie back, there needs to be room to make room for Angelo Breezy. So, it's really hard to tell. There's going to be one team that's, we're all going to come back. If that's Villanova, I think that puts them in the championship conversation yet again next year. But something's telling me, maybe one guy stays another year. But I'm thinking those guys like Jermaine Samuels and Colin Gillespie, I think they're just gonna move on to the next chapter in their lives and their career.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be interesting. And you bring up a very good point. Like, do you bring back the guys for one extra year while sacrifice a guy who's going to contribute for another 2, 3, maybe even 4 years? So that's going to be interesting to say the least. But CJ, before we leave, can you tell everyone here where they can find you on social media?
You guys can find me on Twitter at CJHolmes22.
All right. Thank you for coming on, CJ. And for everyone at home, remember to listen like you play with intensity.